Welcome back to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio, podcast, and television show. I'm your host, Life Coach Renee Young, and sitting in the guest chair today is Daryl Stickle. Daryl and I are going to be talking on the topic how to build stronger relationships with trust. Now, how many of you know that trust is foundational in any relationship? And Daryl is the expert on building trust in your business, building trust. He helps the military build trust with other countries. But today, because this is a personal development, podcast, we're going to focus more on building trust with relationships. So definitely stick around so you can learn something and how to strengthen your relationships. So welcome, Daryl.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome. Right. Yes. Trust. Love the topic. Love to learn a few things from you as well as we proceed with our conversation. All right, guys. So let me give you a brief bio on Daryl. Daryl Stickle is one of the world's leading experts in trust with over 20 years experience. His PhD, Building Trust in Hostile Environments from Duke University, established him as a global leader for governments, businesses, and NGOs on practical approaches to building trust. Daryl has worked for McKinsey and Company, in their Toronto office, as well as advised the Canadian military on building trust in Afghanistan. He has served as faculty for the Luxembourg School of Business and the Center for Effective Organizations at the University of Southern California, and recently completed his book, Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So I know our bio kind of introduced your work to our listening audience, Daryl, but I always like to start off about why you got into this work. What made you decide to write your PhD thesis on building trust in hostile environments? How did that come about?
Well, so I was born and raised in a small town in northern Canada, a place called Fort St. John. It's about 12 or 13,000 people there when I grew up. And it's a pretty hostile climate. Minus 40 was not unusual.
Wow.
Um, and we were fairly isolated. So people actually had to pull together. There was a sense of community. And there was this belief that I came away with that if you could help people, you should. And so I grew up in that environment, and I had a series of turbulent events in my life that pushed me to have a stronger sense of empathy than most. Because I'd experienced hardship, I'd experienced, trauma. And sometimes a hard road is a good teacher. And so I went to university, and people would just sit down next to me on the bus and say, I'm really having a hard time. And so I started to move towards a path of clinical psychology. I was thinking that was where I was supposed to go. And so I was working with families in crisis and troubled teens and street kids and working on crisis lines and those kinds of things. And then I realized that a lot of the folks I was working with were just doing the best they could, that it had taken them years to get to where they were. It was going to take years for them to unravel it if they ever could. And I thought, this is just so frustrating. And so I moved into public administration. I was doing a master's degree in public admin and working in native land claims in British Columbia. And they would ask me deep philosophical questions like, well, what is self-government? Or what will the province look like 50 years after claims are settled? And the last question they asked me was, how do we convince a group of people we've shafted for over 100 years they should trust us? And I thought, wow, that's a good question. And it got me thinking.
Were they talking about the Indians?
Yes.
The Indians, right? Okay.
Yeah, they mistreated them, and there's a long history of them, not being treated well, and it's had a long-term impact on their way of life and their ability to thrive. And it got me thinking about those long-term disputes that we see, right? And how they become so resilient, long after they're doing anyone any good, they're still arguments and conflict going on. And so I went to Duke and wrote my doctoral thesis on building trust in hostile environments. And I
Hmm.
was really quite fortunate. I was blessed because two of the leading academics in the world ended up being there at the same time I was. Um, and they were on my committee. And they said, when you first came to us, like after I'd finished, they sat me down and they said, when you first came to us, we had a conversation and we agreed it's too big, too complex. You'd never solve it. And we decided we'd give you 6 months. You'd come crawling back to us and say, I can't solve it. And they said, we were going to let you chisel off a little piece of it, and that would be your thesis. Said, and then 6 months in, you were so far beyond us, we couldn't help anymore. And all we could do is sit and watch, and we think you've solved it. And
Okay.
so that was what led me down this path.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Yes, as you were as you were talking about the Indians, I mean, I'm originally from, not originally, but it's one of my paths. I was born in Guyana and I spent, but 25 years in Toronto, Canada, and I'm now in the United States.
Right.
And so I now consider myself an African American. And I'm not consider myself, I'm in now the climate of African American in in the US. And here you
Mm,
started off talking about how do you build trust with the Indians but yeah, we have the same problem here in the United States,
absolutely.
but the Blacks, building trust, wow. And that will be a whole different topic. I can bring you back for that one.
Okay.
But yes, eh, yeah, I live in a country here where the Blacks don't trust the whites and the whites don't trust the Blacks, and it's incredibly hard. So hey, if there's one thing we can kind of make a right here in our conversation, is maybe we can lay some foundations of how that can happen for anybody that's listening. But I
Absolutely.
know that you help leaders in organizations, so we'll start with there, because you're right. You're just talking about them telling you it's too big.
Right.
So this race relations thing is probably too big. So maybe let's chisel it down to trusting in an office, because
Right.
normally in an office it's like in the corporate world, I should say, it's all, nobody trusts anybody either, right?
Right.
It's a dog eat dog world, and people are stabbing you in the back to climb the corporate ladder. So you have a structured and systematic approach that you help leaders to build trust with their subordinates. So we can start there, and maybe we can learn something that can
Sure.
transport us to race.
Yeah. Yeah. So I I also do work with families, trying to help them understand how to build stronger relationships within them and those kinds of things. Um, for me, trust is a willingness to make ourselves vulnerable when we can't completely predict how someone else is going to behave. And if I'm a leader, you know, how do I know if people trust me? Because I'll ask these questions, right? One of the challenges we face is just a lack of awareness about who we trust and how much. Um, and if I asked you, do you trust me? You'd feel awkward, right? It's awkward to say no because that would be rude and it might trigger a response and the appropriate response would be with what, right? Not do I trust you? Because our head goes to this place where we either trust people or we don't. It's a dichotomous variable, right? Like an old time light switch. And the reality is we trust some people more than others. And so when I ask people, who do you trust? I get these close, tight personal relationships, best friends, siblings, spouse, parents. Um, when I flip the question and I say, who trusts you? I get this sort of long pause, right? And then people say, well, how would I know? How do I know if someone trusts me or not? And the answer is embedded in that definition. It's how can people make themselves vulnerable to me? And then do they? And so if I'm a leader, my subordinates can make themselves vulnerable by telling me what their real development needs are, by taking risks, making mistakes, by pushing back against things that they don't think are going to work, by coming up with innovative, creative solutions, taking risks by telling me the bad news, not waiting for someone else to tell me or waiting until it's, too late to do anything about it. So there's a bunch of ways that my subordinates can make themselves vulnerable to me. And the question is, do they? And to the extent that they do, then they trust you. And so there are elements of uncertainty and vulnerability embedded in that definition. And so I believe that trust is a combination of uncertainty and vulnerability. And in fact, it's uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk. We each have a threshold of risk that we're willing to tolerate. And if our perception of the risk goes beyond that threshold, we don't trust. If it's beneath it, then we do. And so building trust actually becomes a fairly simple matter of understanding, where does uncertainty come from? Where does vulnerability come from? And how do I take steps to help people manage those so we can stay below that threshold?
Okay. Well, you said two things there that I want to circle back on.
Sure.
The first thing is you were talking. I'm thinking, how do I build trust, or how do I trust someone?
Mm-hmm.
And as in my culture, and I'm not even sure what I'm using the word culture, but I believe, wherever it came from, that trust is earned, right? So,
Okay.
for instance, when you go into, we're going to start off now with a business relationship, right? We're going to
Right.
go down to a personal relationship, but let's say we're starting off with a business relationship. If I go into a business relationship, um, maybe I'm going to be, like you said, trust what? I am going to go into this relationship with maybe trusting them until they burn me, right? I'm
Right.
going to go in and I'm going to trust somebody until I realize that you're stabbing me in the back, right? So maybe
Okay.
that's where you talk about the vulnerability comes in. But so that's the first one. And then you talked about the level of risk, right? And that's good, because maybe trust is, you started off like a wide-eyed baby.
Right.
You've been burned, so now you've got this guard up, and I'm not sure how much risk I should take by
Right.
trusting my boss, or trusting my peers, kind of thing. So how do
Right.
you how do you navigate that?
Yeah. Wow. Really good questions. And I'm going to try to make the answers as simple and easy as possible. Because that's kind of what I do, is I try to make it so that people, it's accessible. Um, you're right. We start off in the world with a high level of trust. And in most situations, our parents go out of their way to make sure that we don't experience levels of vulnerability that are too high, right? They try to prevent us from being injured. They try to keep people from us, um, who they don't think are safe. And they keep an eye on situations where we might get burned. Um, and so we learn over time about how much risk we're willing to tolerate. And part of that's cultural and part of that's historic. Um, and the example you give of, we start with a new boss or a new team or a new set of coworkers. Yes, there's a certain level of trust there. Um, and it's partly because, we have these expectations that we're all sort of pulling in the same direction. We're all kind of on the same side,
Right.
and we dip our toe, right? We don't make ourselves incredibly vulnerable right away. We accept a little bit of vulnerability as we come to understand them. And I'm going to frame this in terms of relationships. Early in relationships, we have high levels of uncertainty, which means we can only tolerate a small range of vulnerability and still fit beneath that threshold we're comfortable with. As we gain more experience, that uncertainty starts to go down, which means the range of vulnerability we can tolerate starts to grow. And so we're seeing things now like quiet quitting or bare minimum Monday, those kinds of things where people are less engaged at work because they don't want to be as vulnerable.
Hmm.
And, there are actually, I agree with you that trust is earned, but partly it's earned through experience through our lives. because there are times when we trust people without knowing anything about them.
Yeah,
You know, we go to a doctor's office and they say, take off your clothes, and we do, right?
that's a
I've
good one.
tried that in other places. It doesn't work, and
Good
so part of our uncertainty comes not just from us as individuals, but it comes from the context that we're embedded in. And so there's this set of expectations. When I was helping the Canadian military in Afghanistan, I came to realize that context was really powerful, and that one person with a machine gun looked a lot like another person with a machine gun. And so we need to start to understand their context, and make changes within the context to make trust work better, particularly early on until they get to know us.
Yeah, yeah.
And we see trust every day. You go to a restaurant, you cross the street, you get on an airplane. Those are all situations where we're making ourselves vulnerable to somebody else.
Mhm, mhm.
It's a matter of how vulnerable are we making ourselves and how much can we tolerate. And it's why societies with higher trust levels tend to function better. They tend to be more efficient because we don't have to do as much monitoring. We don't have to be as cautious all the time. And so, in those examples you give where we're meeting a new boss, we tell them the information we think they need to have at the start. And when they ask us, can you do this? Can you do that? You go, oh yeah, sure. And then you try to figure it out.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
and it's not until you get a little further in the relationship where they go, can you do this? You say, well, I haven't done that before, but I'm willing to try. Um, and maybe you never get to that place with your boss, right? Or maybe you get to a place with your boss where you say, yes, I could do that, but this would be a better way for us to try it.
That's awesome. So let's put a pin in that right now. So it's very true. When you're in an interview, they tell you that to say, I can do it and then go figure it out. Right?
Right.
So, but what has to happen for you now to be able to trust your boss that he would ask you to do something and you no longer say, I can do it and go figure it out. You say to him, you know what? Um, maybe I need some help. What
Right.
has to happen? Mhm,
So we've talked about uncertainty and vulnerability, right?
mhm,
And so that's a higher level of vulnerability. It means our uncertainty had to go down somehow.
mm,
And
okay,
so uncertainty comes from us as individuals and from the context we're embedded in. Either
mhm,
we came to understand the rules more effectively, or we came to understand the boss more effectively. And so over time, we've had the experience of seeing that boss and how they respond when people say, yeah, no, I can't do that.
right,
Um,
right,
do they respond? So there are three levers we can pull from the individual perspective. There's benevolence, integrity, and ability. And benevolence is the belief you have my best interest at heart and that you'll actually work in my best interest. Integrity is, do I follow through on my promises and do my actions line up with my values? And ability is, do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? And so that boss has to have shown us at some point that their response is going to be supportive and helpful rather than angry and frustrated.
that's good,
And that they're going to tolerate mistakes as you learn and grow,
right,
right? And so if their values are, I want to position you to succeed, and I'm going to ask you to do something that's slightly outside your comfort zone, and you come back to me and say, well, I may not get it perfect. If I'm acting with integrity, I say, that's okay. It's important that you try.
right,
And this is going to be a learning experience.
yes,
A
love
benevolence
that,
perspective would be to say, I want you to be successful. This is a way for you to get there. I'm going to provide the supports you need to help you learn and grow into this role
right,
or
yes,
into the next role.
right, yes, and that's basically how you grow. You have to stretch yourself. So
You
I love that.
absolutely do.
That's perfect. That's a
Yeah.
perfect answer
Well,
because
thanks.
yeah, I would think that listen, my mind is not stable when I'm having a conversation. It's going, it's with
Yeah.
you. And I'm thinking, yeah, why would I trust this boss now to say that? And you're right. is because I'm watching him. I'm seeing what he's done. I might have been in a meeting where someone said something and he bit the person's head off, or he was very sympathetic and understanding. And now
Right.
that gives me the confidence to try that. And it might not work out. Maybe he's having a bad day today, but you're right.
Right.
In order to risk it, that's what I have to see. You have to watch. And that's basically what everybody's doing. Everybody's always watching.
Right
you
from
know.
the time we're born, right? We're observing the world to see what the rules are,
Yes,
right?
exactly. Which is perfect to leading to my second question here, because you also have a system that helps parents build trust with their children by
Yeah.
provoking conversation. And I will tell you, one of the things that I know as a parent is that your kids are always watching.
Yes.
So maybe the way that you help them build trust is a little different. But yeah, how does that work? How did you allow parents and to build trust with your children?
So I've actually written an article on this that's on my website at trustunlimited.com. It's free if people want to go look for it. It's in the blog section. It's around trust and parenting. But again, it goes back to those levers, right? And so we explain the context. So there are 4 levers within uncertainty. I believe that there are 10 altogether that we can pull. And the 4 within uncertainty are benevolence, integrity, and ability. And context is the 4th lever. And so to the extent that our kids understand how we're constrained and, you know, what we can and can't do and what the rules are for our family, then they understand how we're going to behave. But we also need to be able to convince them that we have their best interest at heart. And, I talk about benevolence quite a bit. And when I'm working with families, I'll ask them, I'll say, who here has their kid's best interest at heart? And all the hands go up. When I flip that question and say, how many of your kids would say that? It's about a third, and it's somewhat hesitant. And so, how do we make it obvious? How do we make it land? And it doesn't mean always being nice. Benevolence is truly about having their best interest at heart. And my oldest wanted to get a baseball scholarship. And I said, well, that means you've got to work really hard. You've got to have good grades. You've got to practice hard at baseball. You've got to eat well. You've got to have good relationships with your coaches, good relationships with your teammates. You've got to be a good teammate, all of those things to reach that goal. And now that you've told me that that's what your goal is, I'm going to start asking you questions about those things. And so when he was 12, my oldest said to me, Dad, I know even when you're upset with me, it's about what's best for me. That you're always on my side, you've got my back. And so I start with a relentlessly positive story about my sons. And I have crafted the narrative for them because we interpret the world through stories. They have the story that Dad's always looking out for me. Dad's got my best interest at heart. And so, partly that's around understanding what success means to them. Because we have a challenge when we're thinking about our kids, we're thinking about today, tomorrow, next week, next month, next year, 10 years down the road. We want them to engage in behaviors now that are going to help them 10 years from now. We don't hold ourselves to that standard. And they're thinking about right now. And so for me, we have to start helping them be successful in the moment so that we earn the right to talk about the future. And, with my sons, I hold them accountable for certain things, but they know what the story is. They know it's about what's best for them. And I got to tell you, they're 18 and 21 now, and they're the center of my world. And they have conversations with me that I never would have had with my parents. They share things with me that they're
Yes,
concerned about, struggles they're having, and
yes,
that's the goal, right?
right,
Because we don't want them turning to their friends who are as inexperienced as they are and
right.
who may have an agenda. No one cares more about my sons than I do. No one.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. Does that help?
Oh no, yeah, that was absolutely amazing. As you started off, I said to myself, what has to happen that your kids think you don't have their best interests at heart? Because that is that is something that you shouldn't have to guess. You shouldn't have to
Right.
worry about. But obviously, some kids don't feel that way, maybe because maybe they're being ignored or maybe they're being punished or whatever.
Right.
But I come from the school where it's a biological thing that kids have their parents' best interest at heart. But you're very right. On the flip side, maybe they think that their parents has their best interest at heart, but they're thinking that maybe their parents don't understand them. So
Right.
they're not going to have that conversation. They're probably going to go to their best friends, and that's where they start going down the bad path because
Right.
their best friends are not, in alignment to where they want to go and all that. But so yes, it's
That's the ability lever,
what
right?
was that? Yeah.
That's the ability lever. You don't get me. You don't understand. You can't help me be successful right now. You were never my age. You don't know, people have changed fundamentally since you were this age.
Yes,
We're
yes,
not the same
yes,
anymore. And
yes,
and so that's one of the other levers we can pull is helping them be successful even in small ways early on, gains the trust and the confidence that they can come to us with problems.
yeah,
And the integrity lever is another one, right? Is do I have rules that are just for you and not for me? Well,
yeah,
that doesn't seem,
yeah.
do what I say, don't not what I
Do as
do.
I do. Right, right. Exactly, exactly.
So
Yeah,
that's the integrity lever, right?
yeah,
Is
yeah,
do I have expectations for you that I would also fulfill? Um, yeah. And so these are all ways we can reduce uncertainty. And then when we're talking to our kids, when I talk to my sons, I explain to them, I'm never more vulnerable than when it comes to you. Nothing matters more to me, which
yeah.
means I can't tolerate a lot of uncertainty.
Mm,
And
that's good.
I need you to help me understand what's going on.
Yeah.
Because if I sit here alone in the dark wondering where you are, my
Hmm.
mind goes to terrible places.
Yes.
And so they come to understand, oh, this isn't about him controlling me. This isn't about him trying to, dictate my life. This is about him worrying and being vulnerable and
Yes.
having uncertainty that he needs to deal with.
I love that. I love that. That's definitely a good way to put it because you're right. People might think, "Oh, you're a helicopter parent and you always want to know where I am and all that." But if you let them know, I can't. I love that. I can't
Yeah,
tolerate uncertainty when it comes to you. I need to know for my sanity, and that
right.
you can come to me with anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So yes. So that's beautiful. It's beautiful.
yeah.
I
And
like
and
that.
letting them see that our response is going to be consistent, right?
Mhm.
That and the mantra I've had with my sons is things happen, it's how we respond that matters.
Right.
And I was dealing with a parent whose son had gotten into trouble with the law. He and some friends had gotten into a scrap with another group of young men. Um, Somebody had a club, like it was serious stuff.
Mhm.
And so he calls me and he says, I just had to go bail him out. And he's angry and agitated. And I said, you're really upset? And he goes, yeah, I'm really upset. I said, why? Well, he did this stupid thing. He could have got hurt. I said, okay, why are you upset? And it took several questions like that until we got to the place where he went, nothing matters more to me than him. And he was at risk. I said, how about we start there? How about you start the conversation with him there
Yeah.
instead of
Beautiful.
yelling and angry? And
That's a typical reaction too.
it is.
Why you do these stupid things? You know what I mean? I'm so angry. Why, did I not
I
teach you to make better choices and all these different things? But
really were scared.
we're gonna go there first. And
Yeah. I'm scared and I don't know how to respond.
yes, so we're gonna go there first. This is a good conversation. I'm loving this. All right. So we've talked about the office, we've talked about parents, really good
Yeah.
conversations. And now you also talk about problems like climate change, race relations, pandemics,
Yeah.
political divides. All these things dramatically increase levels of anxiety, and declines in mental health and result in the global trust levels being the lowest have ever been. And
Right.
you say that building trust is a skill that we can all get better at. So this is where now we're going to talk about building trust in our personal relationships, because as we were talking about, going into an office and trusting your
Right.
boss, that level of trust is minimal. But when we're going into relationships and we're,
Yes.
first of all, you got to trust when you're going into it. And then when
Yep.
you're in it, you got to trust. So what is it that we can do to have, some parameters that we can build trust and as we evolve in our relationships? Or
Right.
actually, I think you said this, how does trust evolve in a relationship? So I mean, from start going through out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, it's that blend of uncertainty and vulnerability. And in our relationships, as uncertainty gets more and more compressed, as we become more and more convinced that we know the other person and how they're going to act, the range of vulnerability we can tolerate starts to really grow. And in our deepest relationships, we've got very small levels of uncertainty, which means we can be incredibly vulnerable with one another. And there can be things that happen to cause the uncertainty to rise for us, um, which makes us uncomfortable, right? And so partly it's around pulling these levers again, right? And in slightly different ways. Um, when I work with people around how to build trust, I focus in on the 10 levers that I talk about. So 4 of them are within uncertainty, 2 of them are within vulnerability. There's 2 within perceived outcomes, because we interpret the world through stories. You and I can have the same experience and have a different perception of what just happened. And then there's our emotional states, whether we like or dislike someone else. And most of the trust research treats people like rational actors. And you've had kids, so you know that people aren't always rational. And so, treating people like rational actors works when our emotions aren't very strong. But as our emotions become stronger, we become less and less rational. And so when we're in love, we have this powerfully positive story about the other person. We interpret things through that positive lens. We're more likely to trust them. We're more likely to see the outcomes as positive, interpret the world through a positive perspective, which makes us love them even more. And it creates this virtuous cycle. When we dislike people, we have a negative story about them. We search for evidence to confirm that negative story. And we're less likely to trust them, more likely to see the outcome as negative, and it creates this vicious cycle. And so part of what we want to do is understand the other person's perspective, include them in conversations. And so a lot of times when I'm working with couples, we'll talk about benevolence, right? Which is one of my favorite levers. I was working with a student in Luxembourg, and I said, I want you to tell me a relationship that's really important to you. And he said, my girlfriend. I said, great. When you go home tonight, you're going to say to your girlfriend, I was talking with Daryl today, and he said that benevolence is really important to building trust. And that means having someone else's best interest at heart. And he asked me about a relationship that really mattered to me, and I said, you. I said, so that's step one. You've told her that the relationship is important to you, that she matters. So that's step one of showing benevolence. I said, what do you think is most important to your girlfriend? He said, oh, I think it's her family. Great. So you're going to say to her, he asked me what was most important to you, and I said your family. Is that right? Now you're including her in the conversation, giving her the opportunity to correct you or disagree. I said, but most likely she'll say yes. And when she says yes, you're going to say, then I suspect it matters that I get along well with your family. So moving forward, I'm going to spend more time with your family. I'm going to have lunches with them. I'm going to have more conversations with them. I'm going to try to build stronger relationships with them because it matters to you. That's how we become transparent and show benevolence. And he came back the next day and he said, okay, so I'm allowed to talk to you whenever I want. Um, that went incredibly well. What are we going to talk about next? And so we talk about the levers, and then we talk about how to pull them. And if you and I were meeting for the first time and I wanted to strengthen our relationship, I would say to you, benevolence really matters. And this is a conversation template I give people and a set of questions I give them to ask folks. And I'd say to you, I think I act in people's best interest, but it doesn't always seem to land that way. Have you ever had that experience? And you would say, yeah, I have, because almost all of us have. And then I'd start to narrow the funnel and I'd say, have you ever had somebody really have your back? Really look out for your best interest, really try to help you succeed. And you would start to say, yeah, I have. And you'd start to share that story and some of the things that had happened. And I'd say, well, what did they do? What did that feel like? And now I'm getting hints for what benevolence looks like for you. And then I narrow the funnel even further and I say, what does success look like for you? How do I help you get there? What would it look like if I was benevolent? And now we've created a situation where I'm able to be transparent in the future. And so before we started this, you said a good guest is somebody who's a good conversationalist or a good conversation. How are we doing?
You're doing great.
Yeah. Right. And so
So
this
you're
is me.
checking in, huh?
I'm
Okay.
checking in, and this is me trying to be transparent about having your best interest at heart.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Yeah. As you were talking, my mind again is going into personal experiences. And,
Right.
I heard somebody say something the other day that I think was so true, that you might have someone's best interest at heart. And when you have someone's best interest at heart, you might have to practice tough love.
Right.
But you've got to understand the energy that's combined it. You know what I mean? Because if I've got your best interest at heart, then maybe I might say to you, hey, you know what? You need to go to the gym, or maybe you shouldn't
Right.
eat, or whatever. But I might
Yes.
be looking at it and I might be thinking something else. But if you figure out the energy that's come behind it, like, why am I saying that? I mean, it's not something that you want to hear, but why
Right.
am I saying that? So I love it when if you can just establish up front that in whatever ways, whether it's actions, whether it's words, that I'm going to have your back. I have your best interest at heart. And as we move through relationships, right? Um, uh, Again, when I say trust is earned, or whatever,
Right.
you will have experience where, hey, you know what? I was in a bad place and I called on you and you responded. You didn't give me
Yeah.
the brush off and you didn't tell me that you got no time for me. And that lets me realize that you've got my back. So yeah, so it's yes, it's very good. And I like what you said about the outcome. Um uh, one of the levers is, what is the desired outcome? And you ask for, how can I help you become more successful? But
Right.
yeah, that is great. I love that. Go ahead. Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. You use an example that I use often. Somebody walks by, you and I are having dinner together, and they see me about to eat this big dessert, and they go, "Oh my God, Daryl, you're not going to eat that, are you?" Their intent is benevolent, right? But they don't realize that this body doesn't just happen, right? There's years of neglect. There are some serious mistakes that have been made. And and so
That's
it
funny.
probably doesn't land the way they intend,
Right,
right?
right.
But if they
Mhm.
had had a conversation with me beforehand where I said, look, I'm trying to lose weight, you know, them coming along and going, oh, you're not going to eat all that, are you? Is actually going to land differently. It's how we interpret those
Mhm.
actions that's important, the story that we have.
Yes, yes,
So,
yes,
me sort of checking in with my son to say, have you exercised this afternoon? How are things going with your coach? Those kinds of things. Those go from dad's nagging me to dad's got my back.
yes,
The
yes.
same set of behaviors, right?
So let me get that one again, because somebody might have missed it. So you're saying that in order for you to practice tough love or to say something that you think is going to push the person in a positive direction, you first have to have the conversation to
Yeah.
let them know that you've got their back. You can't
Yeah.
just jump them.
Yeah. They need to be able to interpret that as, okay, I understand why you're doing this. Right.
So hang
Because,
on. First of all, do they give us permission or not?
well, they don't have to give us permission.
Okay, all right.
Um, if we're in a situation where someone's engaged in behavior that's harmful to them,
Mhm.
I used to work with street kids, and I would let them choose the distance, and I'd say to them, these are consequences for your actions. Um, and I had to hold a firm line, and they came to appreciate that.
Mhm.
Um, but
Yes.
they understood why I was doing what I was doing. The why of it is so important for kids because, you know, for adults like you and I, of course we assume that we have our kids' best interest at heart, but they don't start off with that story. They feel judged, they
Yes.
feel,
Picked on.
put upon, picked on. They
Yes.
they
Yes.
think, we don't, we're doing these things for our own interests, it's
Right.
easier for us. Um, oh, you just get me to do chores because you don't want to do them. Um, this makes your life easier. That's why you've got me doing it. That's the narrative that can crop up often for kids.
Mhm.
And kids are not fully baked, right? They don't have the same set of experiences. And if we want them to change behavior patterns, we need to approach it in a way that they can hear it and accept it. Not that they're going to be 20 years from now going, wow, I really wish I'd listened to mom.
Right.
Um, we need them to start absorbing that content now in a way that they can accept it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. That's good. That's good. So let's summarize how do you build trust with personal relationships. So I think what you're saying is that the levers like the benevolence, I don't think we touched integrity, but benevolence and I've got your best interest at heart. So
Right.
that is one of the ones that we start. And once I believe that you've got my best interest at heart, then the trust is going to start there, right? But
It
then you
starts
said
getting better.
more. So how do we build on it? Right.
So integrity is another one. So
Right.
we make sure that we have a shared understanding of what our commitments are. So if I make a promise to you, I need to make sure that you understand the promise the same way that I offered it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And because that's one of the places we fall down.
Misunderstanding. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Um, and that I'm able to connect the stories of this is why I'm doing this to the values that I have, right? And so I'm trying to raise a good human being. I want you to be thoughtful and engaged and able to take appropriate risks in the world. And so that's why I'm saying yes or no to this. These are the questions that are going through my head as I'm thinking about this. And so we're able to tell the story because we interpret the world through stories. If we don't help someone construct the story, they build their own.
Yeah.
And and so they may have a dramatically different narrative than the one we have as we're going along. The same with ability. You know, we all have the ability to build trust. Some are better than others. Those who aren't very good have a lever that they pull. It's the ability lever, usually. I have these kinds of credentials, this much experience because I'm your mother and I said so. Um, those, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those who are better at building trust have multiple levers that they pull. Those who are really good have multiple levers and they know when to pull which one.
Yeah. Wow.
And so, even for the ability lever, when I'm working with folks, I'll say to them, what is excellence? And I asked you what an excellent guest was. If I wanted to really excel, I would ask not just you, but I'd ask your audience,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I can have my own perceptions of what good looks like,
Right.
but I need to include other people in that conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing when we're at work or when we're a parent or when we're a spouse. And it's a hard question to ask, right? Because when I say to my sons, what's a good dad look like? The fear in my heart is that they're going to say, not you. right? And and so because that would crush me. But
Wow. Yes, I gotta
but
share this. I gotta share this. I was just watching at the movie Queen Charlotte, and the queen is saying, "I've been an excellent mother," and her son says, "No, you have not. You've been an excellent queen, but you've not been an excellent mother." And I'm thinking, dagger to the heart.
yes, yes, yeah,
Yes, 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 yes,
yeah. And
yes.
I remember that's a great story.
Mhm.
Um, I remember having conversations with my sons about what good looks like.
Yeah.
And I'm legally blind and I've got post-concussion syndrome from a series of concussions. And so I have a lot of flaws. And when I started asking my sons, what does good look like? They said, these are the things you do that I really appreciate.
It's beautiful.
You show care and concern for me. You put me first. You're always curious about what's going on for me. So they were able to articulate the positives and to share with me what really made them happy I was their dad. And I've got an incredible relationship with my
Beautiful.
sons.
I can tell it's coming
Yeah.
through right here on this on this channel.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I want that for everyone.
Lights you up, right? Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's part of why I do what I do. And in the dedication of my book, I said, my
Mhm.
aspiration is to make the world a better place for my sons.
Right. Yes.
Um,
Okay.
yeah.
So yes, that's beautiful. This is a great conversation. I love it. And we did the cross section, but it all starts on. I'm pretty sure that even though we're doing a cross section of business and children and spouse, your lovers is interpersonal relationships,
Yeah.
interpersonal skills, and it covers the whole gamut,
Yeah.
everything. So that's amazing. So tell us about your book. It's called Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World. Now you've got the tagline leadership in there. So did you go into these parental as well as personal relationships in there, or is it strictly
There's
a leadership book?
there's some personal stuff as well. I find the model holds. I had to pick somewhere to start.
Right. Okay.
Um, and if I were going to write another book, which I may, it would be around parenting and family.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, I was I've been having some really profound impact. I worked with one of my students in Luxembourg was a father who was estranged from his kids.
Mhm.
Um, his sons were 3 and 5, and he'd been working away for most of their lives. And the thing that I get my students to do is to apply the model to a relationship. And
Mhm.
so he decided to apply it to his 2 sons. And at the start, he said, I fear that this relationship is broken forever. I don't know what to do. I get scared and anxious and angry and frustrated, and I seem to always say the wrong thing and do the wrong thing. And they're scared of me. And as we went through the course, we had conversations. I coached him. I showed him the model. We talked about how to pull the levers with his sons, how to show them benevolence, integrity, ability, how to show them the context and explain it to them, how to understand how they were vulnerable to him. And at the end of 3 months, he wrote his final report and he said, the relationship's changed completely. My
Wow.
kids run to me now. They throw themselves on me. They
Wow.
tell me they love me all the time. They fight over
Wow.
who gets to sit next to me. I was having that kind of impact, but I felt like I was dropping grains of sand into the ocean.
Mm.
And what I really want is people like you and your listeners to come alongside and pick up great big rocks so we can
Mm.
really make a splash.
Nice.
And I know that we can all get better at building trust. It's a skill we can all build. And so I wrote the book. I put everything in there. There's no hidden messages that I've kept secret. I've put the whole model. I've also, talked through all 10 levers. I've talked about how to pull those levers effectively. Um, I've given examples and case studies of situations where those levers have been pulled and what we've done. Um, and so the intent of the book is to really scale things. And I've got a master class. It's about 3 hours in length. It's 5-minute segments. Um, that really walks people through and uses role plays and exercises to help people actually apply the skills. Because that's the real aspiration for me, is not just that people read the book and go, that was interesting, but they start practicing these
Right,
things and
skills. Yeah,
trying them, right, and applying
yeah,
them.
yeah.
And I got to tell you, the impact is incredible. And people, I get a lot of the same comments back, which is, it looked like it should be easy. It sounded like it should be easy. I started trying to do it. It felt awkward and uncomfortable because it's like learning a new exercise or
Mhm.
training a new muscle. But the response was so positive. When I said to someone, hey, I'd like to try to practice these things, I'd like to try to build a stronger relationship with you, people go, okay, yeah, I'd love to do that. And they have so much patience for me fumbling and trying things and practicing, and because they've been told what the intent is, they have a positive story about what my goals are, and it gives me time to practice.
That's amazing. I'm sitting here thinking, wow, there's so many ways that I can use this in my personal life. But I mean, I've got like at least five people that I can change the conversation and
Yeah,
use these. And even though we're calling it trust, I see it as masters of communication,
yeah,
right? It's trust mixed up with communication. How
yeah,
should I communicate with you to build trust? Maybe that's actually how I'm gonna title this. But
yeah. So it's a framework that applies a bunch of different concepts, right? And
yes,
so,
yes, yes.
we're
Mhm.
talking about, you talked about some of the complex problems we're facing, things like race relations, climate change,
Yes,
global warming,
yes,
pandemics,
yes,
international conflict. These all require us to pull together,
yes.
right? We've gone through a history of both sides saying, "Well, you need to fix it," to the other side.
Mhm.
What the issue is we need to fix it. We need to figure a way to work together, collective collaborative action,
Yeah,
and we can start to build better relationships. We can do it. And I've
yeah,
seen it. I've gone into difficult settings and helped people come together and have conversations. And you're right, there's elements of emotional intelligence, there's elements of vulnerability and psychological safety, and all of those things are included.
yeah,
It's a framework to sort of take
yeah,
a lens on the world.
yeah. I can see it working, and I'm definitely gonna start using some of the things that you talked about. One of the main ones is letting someone know upfront that you've got their best interest at heart. And if you
Yeah,
start with that foundation, right, then the conversation is going to go much better
yeah,
because they're going to believe that you've got their best interests at heart. And we're talking about spouses and relationships and you're right, children, even though I didn't think that, that was something that you had to convince someone of, but you're right. Um, and then, you're talking about integrity. Integrity is very important. You
yeah,
do what you said that you're going to do, right? And then abilities. I love that. We're only talking about the top three here, but then,
right,
yeah, your ability to do what you said you're going to do, and your ability to communicate. And I will tell
right.
you, communication is a skill that, even though I'm on this show talking all the time, yeah, my communication ability to get someone on the other end of me in interpersonal relationships don't always
Right.
work out great because, yeah, maybe I'm not transferring maybe I'm not pulling those levers. So that's basically what you teach, the
Yeah.
levers and when to pull them. It's an amazing thing. So I definitely can see the quality or the benefit of your work.
Well,
So
thank you.
how, yeah, so how do people get in touch with you and tell us about your website, tell us about your course,
So
tell us
you
about your social media handles and all that.
right. You can reach out to me at Daryl at trustunlimited.com. That's DARRYL at trustunlimited.com. You can go to the website, trustunlimited.com, and there's a blog section there with articles and some podcasts. Um, there's a course there, the masterclass that's available. You can order the book anywhere online. People can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Um, and you know, the impact that I've seen with folks reading the book and taking the course has been really remarkable. It leaves people feeling like there's something they can actually do about this stuff.
Yes.
There's a lot of people talking about trust, but there's not a lot of people talking about how to actually build it. And that's what I do.
And how to do something about it. So that's amazing.
Yeah.
All right. So is LinkedIn the only social media platform you're on?
I've got a YouTube channel. It's
Okay.
just in its very early stages. It's
Okay.
Trust Unlimited Podcasts. I think there's
Okay.
only one on there so far. I've got like
That's
77.
all right. And then you're gonna add this one.
Yes,
So
I am.
what's your LinkedIn handle?
It's just Daryl Stickle.
Okay, so you just your name. Okay.
Just my name, Daryl
All
Stickle.
right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I look
Awesome.
forward to
Wow.
hearing from folks. And you and I are going to have another conversation where we're going to talk about race relations.
Yes, yes, I gotta bring you back for that. It's as soon as you start talking about wow, that's a huge topic.
It
So
is.
yes, that's a date. We will definitely come back and talk about, building trust and race relationships, right? Wow.
Yeah.
As but how would you convince someone that the other person has got their best interests at heart? You don't even need
It's a
to
real
answer that. I'm
challenge.
just thinking.
It's a real challenge.
Yes, that is definitely a real challenge. So yes, yes. So we'll
First,
come
you'd
back
start
and
by
talk about that. What was
first you'd
that?
start first you'd start by including them in the conversation, asking them what their best interests really are,
Really?
instead of
Yeah,
just assuming,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because
I would be interested in that.
there have been a number of attempts where people have said, "Hey, we've got your best interest at heart," and it's turned out horribly, or it's been misinterpreted. Um,
Yeah. Again,
Assuming that
it's
we're going to do that.
actions over a period of, you talked about 100 years or so in Canada, but what is it, like, I don't know, how many years here, 200 years or whatever.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's you don't talk about it, is what you do. And how can I build trust when, yeah, it's happening every single day where there's,
yeah,
yeah, you're right. We're getting into the conversation already, but yes, let's save that one for later. You guys come back later when we're going to talk about what both sides can do to build
right.
trust and to pull those levers. So that's amazing. So Daryl, this has been an incredible conversation, and I know that I'm going to run with some of the things that you have dropped here today, and
Yeah,
that's one, how to have the conversation and let someone know that you got their best interest at heart, number one, and number two, you said something about how you get someone to um uh, uh, when you're going to practice tough love. How do you have that conversation? You can't just say,
right,
you know right, you can't just attack, like my husband
right.
says, attacking me.
Yeah. And so that
Yes,
conversation with your husband
yes,
starts off with, I care about your health. I care about your
right,
mental health. And I'm
right,
seeing the following patterns that aren't good for you.
right,
And I'm
right.
about to lean in because I'm struggling to figure out how to help you change those.
Mm, good.
And
Love that,
being
love that,
soft
love that.
hasn't worked.
Right.
I might,
Ignoring it doesn't work.
right. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. So yes, I'm gonna go around with some of your information that you've left here. So thank you so much, Daryl, for being on the show. Thank you so much for this
Thank you for having
information.
me.
Yes, it's the first trust topic I've had in the show, so this was a good one. Thank you guys for tuning in to the Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life radio podcast and television show. I bring you quality guests like Daryl every week so that we can help you to transform your lives and live your best life now. I love something that Daryl says that, like, as parents, we always look in the future about where we want our kids to be. But, we need them to understand right now and process it right now. It's not going to do them any good, right, when they look back when they're 35 and says, you know what, I should have listened to my parents, when they've already made tons of mistakes that you can't take back. So yes, what I'm trying to do is have you live your best life now, not when you're in your third act, but right now. So I bring on guests like Daryl, and I pick guests based on their content. so that I can help you. So thank you, Daryl. Thank you guys for tuning in. Transcript of my conversation with Daryl, including the links to his LinkedIn and his books and his courses, will be on the show page, which is blog.myhelps.us. So anything that you need to, maybe you've missed something, definitely check that out. And of course, you can check out if you're listening on iTunes, you can also check out the Transform Your Mind podcast. Podcast YouTube channel. So listen, guys, thanks again for tuning in. Daryl, as we wrap up, any last words?
One of the first steps is to make ourselves vulnerable first, because it initiates a norm of reciprocity. And I've tried to model some of the things today, showing benevolence, integrity, ability, made myself a bit vulnerable. I hope folks take away those things and start applying them to their lives. And thank you, listeners, for hanging out with us.
Yes, you're very welcome. All right. Well, listen, guys, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. We will meet you right back here next week for another episode, Transform Your Mind to Transform Your Life, radio, podcast, and television show. Until then, namaste.
Namaste.